Hey everybody, it's a beautiful sunny day outside today. This is Mark Clements, Artistic Director of Milwaukee Rep, continuing our What's the Tea theme, where Brit style we share a cup of tea over the proverbial virtual kitchen table and with the guest, and then go back to the business of our day. Today, my guest is a guy I've known for pretty much the 10 years that I've been living in Milwaukee, a lifelong Milwaukeean, very well known to most Milwaukeeans, maybe one of the most famous Milwaukeeans. It's John McGivern, who is an actor, performer, writer, the host of Around the Corner, the PBS award-winning, Emmy award-winning TV series, which has been around for many years now and beloved. Welcome, John. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to see you. If it's not just in this platform.
I know. Wouldn't it be nice to actually see each other in person? Although actually we do occasionally run into each other because you live in the same building that my mother is a neighbor, and I wasn't going to go into the fact that in her first week she flooded your apartment. So we're very sorry for that.
Second day.
Hopefully she won't see this and will not curse me out for doing that.
Your mother is lovely, and it's funny because you know, mother, she lives above me in part of my condo, and the fact that it took, you know, the history of your mother's coming to America is known within circles, and the fact that she's living here is a joy to all of us who followed that saga. So I don't mind that she flooded my apartment just a little, just so you know, because now she's home.
Well, you're a gem, John. Thank you. Yeah, it was took 2.5 years to get her here, and she arrived on March the 7th, just literally below the radar. And I think honestly, with all its issues and self-quarantining and everything that's going on in the country and the world right now, you know, it is a blessing to have her here, and it does give me a degree of comfort that she is below you, even though there's a potential water hazard involved. But I appreciate it.
We'll take care of her, okay, Mark?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So yeah, it's great to have you on this. You know, it's interesting. You know, a week ago we were dealing with a massive issue which we've been dealing with for 11 weeks, and now it seems like 11 to 12 weeks, which was obviously this COVID pandemic,
Sure.
shutting our businesses down. The rep obviously closed all its operations down, and you know, we're doing online activity and figuring out when we can come back safely to our audience, and to for our staff and actors to be able to work safely together again as well. Obviously that, and then of course in the last week, we've been embracing another national tragedy as we the oppression of our African American brothers and sisters has been very much highlighted and shown in the most ugly form, the inequities that so many people are living with within this country. I mean, it seems like our world went from one very grave place to another place. You're in curfew every night. I know that in Milwaukee, in the city, where we've been in curfew for the last 4 nights, lots of demonstrations, many peaceful, but some not, with a lot of kind of activity and violence being perpetrated by between the law and protesters and outside influences probably as well, which we could all do without. And obviously, your Around the Corner was immediately brought to a standstill. I did see you broadcasting an episode from the very home that you're talking from right now.
Right.
What's your process? How's your world been for, your world in particular been for the last, with all of this going on for the last 3 months, best part of 3 months now?
Well, Mark, it's been very, first it was my world, and then it was the whole world, and now it's the world that I call mine, which is my cities. which has now become international as far as what's happened in the last week. And I often talk about my being raised in this city and going off to high school seminary with the Capuchin Franciscans, whose work is social justice. So we who were raised with that concept and raised with any sort of fairness around race, nobody can be surprised as to what is where our world is today. It's surprising that we haven't moved closer to what's fair, so, and in the middle of all of this, something incredibly personal happened. My mom passed on April 2nd. So she was quarantined at the Catholic home for all of March, so I hadn't seen her, and she was well. And in the middle of her being quarantined, she fell ill one day and died the next. So we as a family of 5 brothers and sisters had to come to terms with what are we going to do around my mom's passing. Thank the Lord that I have a family, that it's my family of origin that's here for me. And thank the Lord that I have a family of choice that's here for me through the rest of it, because my world has completely stopped, much like yours. I have 3 things that I do for a living. I have my corporate and my jobs that I do in front of. I stand in front of people. This is the longest I've been that I haven't stood in front of a group of people telling my stories, and it's been 11 weeks. So my corporate jobs all canceled. My public shows have canceled. My TV show has canceled for the time being. And my third thing that I do is that I'm a corporate home provider. And I thank the Lord that through this, I'm still full when it comes to rentals, but the world has changed. And when it comes right down to bottom line, what am I going to do? I'm going to pray. I'm going to do what my parents taught me to do. And that is have faith and an attitude that this too shall pass. And when it passes, my world and your world and what we do for a living may look different, but the heart of what we do has got to maintain. And that's my hope and prayer today.
Yes, beautiful, John, and I give you my deepest condolences, and to you and your family in relation to your mom passing, and not being able to, for many people, you included in your family, not being able to be with people at those sort of times, at times of birth, at times of death, at times of sickness, not being able to be there when somebody's waking up from an operation. I think the permeations on this these tragedies are just really testing us. And I do hope that when we come back, I think in a society we expect a certain prerequisite decency of healthcare, education. We don't always get it. And that's very selective, as we're finding out in this country, who gets that and who doesn't, who has a right to it naturally and who doesn't. But, those would be things one would expect in a civilized society to be prerequisite things, to have, regardless of where your background is, to have decent health cover, to be able to look after your children, to have decent education. And those things are really challenging in this country. As somebody who's coming from the UK, and who is now a dual citizen, very proud dual citizen, but it's a real challenge in this country that I never really faced and looked in the eye of until I started living here permanently and living in the Midwest, which is a very different thing as well, to me visiting and working in America for 2 and 3 months at a time on the East or West Coast. It's been, but I think you're right. When we come back, the arts, those are going to be the things that are going to, they're the things that are holding us together. People, when they haven't got anything to do, they're binging through Netflix, they're looking online at content that we're doing, people like us are producing, and at some point they're going to want the live experience. And actually, just before we came on here, and we apologize for any glitches if you're getting any GoTo Zoom, we're on GoTo right now, as this, if we freeze on you, audience, or becomes frozen in aspect for a moment. But I do think, a bit like text culture, we've talked a lot in the past about, how a text replaces somebody actually picking up the phone and writing. has replaced letter writing completely, something very personal. So I do think we've lost something in terms of our personal interactions around communication, just as human beings on a fundamental, basic level. And having spent the last 3 months 10 hours a day, often on Zoom or go-to meetings, as many people have, just to be able to communicate with families or conduct business as usual, I am feeling something is being lost in virtual reality.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
I feel like I can see you, but there's something about being 4 feet away from you, you know? We would have shaken hands, we would have probably hugged. You know, you can't do that in the current environment. Actually, somebody went to shake my hand the other day. I had a glove on at the time, so I felt comfortable doing it, but it was a weird sensation, actually shaking someone's hand. And the close contact with a stranger outside one's immediate bubble, just doing, you know, an elbow bump or something. How are you? Because you're such a social animal. We're not wired for this. How are you experiencing? What will the trauma be? Because I think that's not too frivolous a word to use about this.
It's not, especially when what you do depends on that sort of being. Like, I'm incredibly social, and what I do for a living is incredibly social, and what I do off work time is incredibly social. So I have now, in the last 11 weeks, have dealt with becoming quiet and becoming solace. Is like, if you would have told me 13 weeks ago that this would have been my life, my home, and my partner Steve, and the telephone and Zoom, I would have been like, you are so full of crap. You know that. But I've come through all of this, I've come to learn quiet. And quiet is something that I don't know if I knew before. And so I'm grateful for that. I want to be loud again. I want to be, when we shoot around the corner, which is what we should be doing right now, 9 summers we've been doing it every summer from May through October. And I've talked to thousands upon thousands of people over the course of these 9 summers. And I'm the guy who's the interviewer who people are like, could you step back a little? Because I creep up, and by the time we're finished talking, I'm on top of them, because that's the kind of person, and that's how my family was. We're on top of each other. And so this is very trying, but I think there's a lesson in all of this. And through quiet, I've been able to realize things that I don't think I would have before. And those realizations deal with my purpose and my stories next. Like, what are the next stories that I need to stand on a stage in front of however many people and tell? This has completely affected these stories.
Yeah, I think the reflection is definitely one aspect of it. The other thing is lowering one's sense of expectation and entitlement, right? It feels like, things that we just took for granted. I'm have time for reflection to kind of see what that is. We've been, eating out in America is just a part of our culture. We do it at the drop of a hat. We have fantastic restaurants in the city, which are, please God, are going to be hopefully, and most of them coming back. But I suspect the reality, depending on how far this thing goes on, is going to be very, very difficult to do, aside from the economic impact of people having spare income to be able to do that. I've been supporting a few of the restaurants that are very dear to me, that I love, and I hope will be back, through gift cards or takeout, like a lot of people. But suddenly getting takeout is has been, in the few times that I've done it, has just been like I've been in prison for 3 years, and I'm coming out and going to a restaurant for the first time. It just feels like things I've naturally taken for granted, I'm really enjoying. And I think, maybe as a society, when we come out through this, and I agree with you, this too shall pass, will we become, my hope is that we could and would become a kinder, more tolerant, more caring, less entitled group of individuals than a society in general.
Well, don't you believe that, those challenges that you saw when you moved here from another country, from across that huge pond, and you talk about you talk about healthcare, and you talk about housing, you talk about all of this, and a lot of people didn't. And don't you think that through all of this, the conversation now is loud, and that because of this, the conversation now, everybody is talking about it, and not just those who are like, those who are much more socially minded and politically minded, but it's become a much greater conversation and a louder conversation. And if through this, that's what we've come to, I believe that it's for the greater good then.
Yeah, I mean, one has to hope, to get out of bed each morning, that these tragedies that we're facing, the social and racial inequities in our country, the fact that regardless of whether you're a billionaire or a homeless person, that you are not impervious to this virus that is around us right now and that we're fighting. It seems to me that there is an opportunity here to recalibrate and look at what opportunities how society can be better. Sometimes it's really hard to wonder why something, I know that you're a religious person, and I'm not a religious person in a conventional sense, but I do have great faith in a higher universe, and I do often look to that and wonder what the lessons here are being taught. You know what I mean? That how does these tragedies that we are facing right now, what opportunity is this giving? What lessons are we being taught? And also, how can we contribute to not replicating some of these things again? Certainly in terms of the racial and social injustice that's become so prevalent in this country, and that, what is a degree of unsettlingness for most white people at this time is now the day-to-day living of most people of color, and especially the African American community.
Yeah. And what's our responsibility? I look at your last 10 years, Mark, and I look at your programming in the last 10 years, and you have picked up a flag and marched forward with telling stories that aren't just your stories and just aren't my stories as a 65-year-old white man. You have made a concerted effort in this community to tell all stories. So personally, that's what we can only do what we can do. We can only do what we can do personally in our jobs, in our social lives, in what we do on a daily basis. And I think you and your organization, Milwaukee Rep, have been doing that since you came to town. And it's a matter of maintaining that flag in your personal life and in your work life and in your commitment to this community, and this community that we all call home. And I applaud you for what you've done in 10 years.
I appreciate it. I think it was somebody asked me at the beginning, I think it was Dr. John Ridley. It was like, what are you going to do as far as diversity and EDI in the city? And I said, I outlined some plans, and he said, well, we've heard that before. And I was like, well, I think only time will tell. It's the long game. I think the rep represents, we're at the beginning of a journey, not at the end of one, or even in the middle of one. But we've been on a long trajectory of 10 years of trying to learn and listen. I do think, what we've got to all do better, is just be opening to listening and to making sure that people have a place at the table to have their voice, and I think what this situation right now, these protests are firmly endorsing, is that, we have to do that. We have to find a place for people at the table. We have to kind of do that in a meaningful way, not just play lip service to it. We have to do it for the long term. We have to educate our children and their children into, so this is a long-term thing, and we have to address head on some of the long-term, the 200-year problems of this country, which is great in many aspects and not in others. And Milwaukee, you know, has always had that tag, you know, of being the most segregated city in the United States. And, you know, I think it's been interesting. I'd be interested to hear your view on how you've seen that, you know, as a young boy growing up here in the burbs, and to where you are now, what you've seen. Has it just become more covert? Is it still the same? Is it better? Has it just become more covert? What's your view on that?
You know, I was raised on the east side, right by UWM. My mother was a book buyer, a trade book buyer for the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee for her entire 30-year career, 30-some-year career. My father was a bricklaying welder who was a union mason, a Democrat from the word go, who not only owned the home that I lived in, our duplex on Bartlett Avenue, but owned the homes on Hampshire. And my dad used to rent to UWM students and was the first person in our neighborhood to rent to a black girl who came from Uganda to study at the university. Our neighbors were so pissed in 1966 that my father rented to a black student that the neighborhood went nuts. My Democratic union organizing father told them all, kiss my butt. This woman is studying. She's from Uganda, for Christ's sake. You know, and this is somebody who came across a pond to study. People who came from across the river is what we were told on the east side. You know, it's funny because in 1968, when the riots happened and we on the east side of Milwaukee were so afraid of the Milwaukee River, you look at the demographic of what that was in history, the map, and it's the same goddamn map. It's the same as it was map-wise. The inner city is the inner city, and you look and you say, in 40 years, 50 years, this has not changed. That's our city's problem, and that's what we're dealing with today in a microcosm of what's going on in the world.
Yeah, well, you know, as we know, in not just Milwaukee, our city, but in other cities, that's all. That didn't just happen by chance. That happened by design. You know, it was deliberate. These cities were constructed, the separation, the segregation, and you know, the time is going to have to come where we're going to have to recognize that, you know, and that we need equitable quality of education and health resource in the inner city as we do in the burbs, you know. And I think until we actually, my mom always says actually something, you know, she says, if you love children, you have to, if you really love your children, if you love your child, you have to be prepared to love all children, you know. And I think that's so true. If we don't love all of our children, I mean, and genuinely from the heart, then we're kind of, until we can get to that place on a very simplistic level, we're going to continue to have problems.
Well, and you look, what do you hope? This is a big discussion, you know, politically. You look at what's gone on with districting and with map drawing, so that in fact it all stays the same. So what I can do, I can go out and talk about what we need to do as voters, that we have a right to change this, and we have a responsibility to make a world the way we need to make it, the way that we see, and we can do that with our vote. You know, you saw what happened on election day here in the city of Milwaukee, I mean, or in the state of Wisconsin, and it's like that. It's remarkable what happened here politically, you know, and I as somebody who will go out and vote again so that change will occur, because we can't live like we're living today, not under what, you know, I look at the news every day. I watch my cable news network, and I realize that we all have a responsibility to change, for change. And that's what we have to do.
Yeah, that was one of the greatest things, actually, you know, in terms of becoming an American citizen, as opposed to somebody who was holding a green card, doing the civics test. The civics test, you know, initially, I've told many people this in the past. Initially, it was an expedient thing to do. You know, I had a job, I had a family here. and I was, I needed my 10-year green card was coming up for renewal. But, I realized I was running a theater as part of a community. I wanted to vote. I wanted to be part of it in a real sense rather than just looking in. I was always talking about you guys rather than we, us. Yes. And I really wanted to do that. And actually, the swearing in ceremony as an American citizen that happened in February 2016 for me was just so moving. It was just, incredibly, in a way that I didn't expect. 69 people in the federal court being sworn in, representing like 30 different countries. One other person from England apart from me. And just the federal judge of that day talking about what our responsibility as citizens is. That it's not defined by religion. It is defined by commitment to community. And when you take the civics test, of which you have to answer 6 out of the 10 questions, which is actually harder than you think, you have to look at 100 potential questions, and they ask you 10 of those potential 100, and you have to pass 60% of it, of that 10. It's very meaningful, and it sounds corny, but actually, I really believe in the Constitution, for the most part, as what it represents about citizens getting involved, taking part, not watching somebody else, taking the lead on something, having a say, using your voice to actually dissent. And we have to keep fighting for that. And at a time when there are people wanting to quash that dissent, and they're wanting to quash our right to peacefully protest and dissent and question. That's the checks and balances. The Constitution's a beautiful thing. If people actually adhere to it and don't try and taint it, it's a gorgeous, beautiful thing. So when people were saying to me like, "Oh, why do you want to become American right now?" Well, because I can be a part of something bigger, and you have to be in it to change it. So I'm very grateful for that, as hard as it is. John, as we come to a close, what are you hopeful for? What are you looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to the ghost light being taken off a stage, and that people will be able to sit in the dark again and listen to these stories and experience these stories that we as performing artists have been assigned to tell, and that's been my assignment in life. I truly believe that, no matter if it's on stage or in front of a corporation or on TV, like I'm the keeper of the stories, and it's my job to relate these stories. My hope is that we come back sooner than not, and that we find a way to deal with all of these issues we've been dealing with. And I know it's slow, but I can only do what I can do. And I'm going to maintain the fact that, as I said you do, I'm going to raise my flag and I'm going to march forward, because that's all we can do. And in the meantime, I love my home, and I love my partner, Steve. And if this is where our assignment is right now, I'm going to make sure that my time is used for good. So I'm hopeful in nature. So I will maintain that hope.
Well, listen, John, cheers. We didn't even, just show your cup to prove that you did have a cup of tea. And I thank you for your time. Mine says peace today. You got it.
Mine says around the corner with John McGivern.
There you go. Peace for around the corner. There you go. There's that's our hope. Thank you for your time. It's always good to talk to you, my friend. You do so much for our community. You're a ray of light and hope, and you've been a great friend since I've been coming to this city and calling it home. And I appreciate your support. And I'm sorry once again for my mom flooding you. We won't do it again.
It's all good. Love you, Mark. Thanks.